This is the best of the Rocker Morning Show with Meatball and Mark.
Roger with Mark and Meatball.
Hey.
Good morning, Rod. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
We're doing great, man. Thank you.
Not too shabby. Founder of one of the original psychedelic rock bands, The Zombies. Please welcome to the Rocker Morning Show, Rod Argent. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, man.
Oh, it's real pleasure being here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, very welcome. So you've got some new music coming out. That's why we're talking to you. It's coming out the end of the month, and a couple singles out already. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But Rod, your music has been somewhat of kind of a poster for the entire genre that continues today in psychedelic rock. That was in the early 60s, and now here we are, 60 years later. What was it like during that time period in the world of music for you?
Well, when we first started in 1964, it was just a young guy's dream come true, as far as I was concerned. And I'm sure it was the same for all the other guys as well. Yeah. I mean, I got into rock and roll by being blown away by Elvis singing Hound Dog in 1956. Okay. And I thought, I have to be in a band sometime when I'm old enough. I was 11 years old then. And I couldn't believe that just 8 years later, was it 8 years? No, it was more than that, wasn't it? But 8 years later, not only did I have a number one single with one of my songs in the US, with She's Not There, but much later on, I learned that Elvis had that on his jukebox. And,
wow.
I thought, well, it's just such an unbelievable dream for me at that point. That was getting into the whole thing, and She's Not There became the first record to get to number one. It was number one in Cashbox after the Beatles with a self-written song. We were the second band with a self-written song to do that.
Wild.
So, it was just great in those early days, and then we were lucky enough to have some more success in the US, and of course we were only professional for 3 years. And then we split up in 67. So those early days were great. But then after that, Odyssey and Oracle, which spawned Time of the Season, not immediately, but it did eventually become, pretty iconic, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I, and it was, and that's always been such a joy, really. So there's no complaints from me at all about the way things have turned out.
Well, like you said, you had those pre-Woodstock Woodstock era anthems. What was it about this time period, in your opinion, that produced so many legendary musicians and really launched rock and roll into the mainstream?
Well, I believe that, particularly in the UK, I mean, when we started, every band in the UK, and we were no exception, we were just in love with American music. Absolutely in love with it, and often it was a way of introducing us to black music by proxy, in a way, because Elvis was the first sort of guy that I ever heard do any sort of rhythm and blues type thing, just living in England. And very soon it led me into listening to Big Mama Thornton, who was the original version of Hound Dog, and then into people like Ray Charles, and it was just a wonderful time for music in the UK. And we didn't have the separation of stations that you guys had over here, because very often over here you had sort of race stations which played all the great black rhythm and blues and stuff, and then you had the stations that were mainly listened to by white guys, and the two sides were separated at that point. But it was a real crucible in the UK. Everything was mixed up. It was marvelous, and because there were very few radio stations in the UK, there was almost nothing played as far as records were concerned. You had to search everything out.
Right.
And it was such a melting pot. It was great. And then when we came back to America, sort of doing what we thought was basically American-based music, it had turned into something very different because of what had happened in that sort of melting pot in the UK. So, I just think it was a combination of circumstances. And then, of course, the American guys really came on board. And I always remember playing the Murray the Case show in 1964, and we were on directly after Patti LaBelle.
Oh, man.
She sounded wonderful. Oh, man. And I thought, she's going to hate us. but we played, and she loved it. She absolutely loved it. She used to come into our dressing room every night and tell us stories about singing in the black churches, and I remember her saying specifically, there's one new kid on the block you have to check out,
Okay.
Her name's Aretha Franklin.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the first time I'd ever heard that name. And then she told us about Nina Simone, and we immediately went back and got all these records.
Yeah.
Right.
Brilliant.
Man. Well, 2019, you guys were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of the original, most people are saying the original kind of psychedelic rock band in the genre. But it's strange to me that, you guys making the music that you were in the UK, and almost simultaneously at the exact same time, you had bands like 13th Floor Elevators and Moving Sidewalks popping up in Texas and in the US with the same kind of music. Do you feel like it was coincidental that both those, different countries kind of came up with the same psychedelic rock idea about the same time?
Well, it was a time of great change in the world, and, the whole peace and love thing was going on. Now, we were never too naive about that, but at the same time, it was very powerful. And I always believe it was the first time that TV ever showed some sort of realist footage about what was going on in Vietnam.
Yeah.
It wasn't as real as you see now, but it was the first time that any war had been represented in anything like a real form.
Right.
And it turned a whole generation against the idea of war and against the idea of why are we destroying our fellow men, etc. And it formed a very powerful backdrop on music, and we couldn't help but be affected by that as well. Although we could see the dangers of it all.
Sure.
And sadly, some of the most wonderful practitioners got their minds messed up, by exploring psychedelic drugs, etc. So it wasn't just all one way, but it was a time that you couldn't help but be affected by if you were in your early 20s, which we were.
Right.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, there is some, and this is what I thought was interesting too, and really what I was looking forward to talking to you. There is some controversy that some people might not be privy to, and that's the fake zombies. There was a few bands posing as the zombies. One of them made up from guys from ZZ Top. But then there was another somewhat imposter zombies band here in Michigan. How did you hear about them initially, and what was your reaction to all that?
I sort of kept away from it personally. I mean, it didn't bother me that much, but some of the other guys in the band were very upset by it, and particularly when we heard that most of the bands were terrible.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Got to protect the brand.
Well, the one in Texas, I think they were throwing records back at them when they were.
Well, I can tell you that's never happened to us.
Right.
It was extraordinary. And I've got some, I'd take all day telling the stories, but there was one story where that we heard about where this guy went along to a fake zombies gig who were pretending to be the real zombies. It was a big audience, and they were terrible. And he went backstage afterwards and said, "You're not the zombies." And they said, "Oh, yes, we are." And the manager pointed. He said, "There's Hugh Grundy there." He said, "You're not Hugh Grundy. Hugh Grundy's a drummer, and you're the bass player." And he said, and then the manager said, "No, we are." And then this guy pulled out a gun and pointed it at him.
Oh my God!
Not the zombies. And he said, "Okay, I own up."
Oh my gosh!
And he was never seen again.
Oh man! Well, clearly you guys are the real zombies, as we mentioned back earlier. You've got some new music out. "Love You All I Can" is out now. That's the first single. "Drop Feeling and Stupid" as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the zombies music from then to now?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in the industry who have heard the album, we've got the most wonderful response to it, and a common thing that they've said is, "This is the best album you've made since Odyssey and Oracle." And if that's true, it's because we approached it in exactly the same way, that we recorded it as close to live as we possibly could. In other words, having everyone recording together in the studio at the same time, and then just adding things like harmonies later. Very similar to how we did Odyssey and Oracle. We wanted that that whole thing where musicians bounce off each other in the moment, and you capture a performance that maybe the sum is better than the sum of the parts. The final thing is better than the sum of the parts, and you get something a little bit magical. That's what we were aiming for on that album, and also I produced it along with our sound man, and on Odyssey and Oracle, Chris White and I produced the album totally ourselves because we wanted our songs to come out in the way that we heard them, rather than another producer's vision of them.
Sure.
And that's what we've absolutely done again. I mean, they're pretty much exactly as I want my songs to be heard. I've written 9 of the 10.
Great.
Colin's done a beautiful last sort of goodbye thought on the album, which is like a soft, tender thing, in the way that the Beatles used to do. It was something like, and in the end, that song.
Love it.
So that's and people have been saying this is the best album you've done since Odyssey. So I really hope that the general public feel the same thing. But we're excited about it.
Yeah, looking forward to it, man.
Absolutely. Different Game, the new album from the Zombies, coming out March 31st. We hope it's a great success for you. Sounds like it's going to be. Rod Argent, we really appreciate your time today with us.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me on. It's been great speaking to you. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Live weekday mornings from 6 to 10 and on demand in the Rocker app. It's the best of the Rocker Morning Show on 107.7 RKR.